the President of National Archive of Korea and the Chairperson of the UNESCO International Center for Documentary Heritage. We sincerely welcome all of you to the first UNESCO ICTH Documentary Heritage webinar. The UNESCO ICTH is the first Category 2 institute in the field of documentary heritage. It started in 2020 under the agreement between the Republic of Korea government and UNESCO. ICTH's goal is to conduct research and educational programs and establish policy development on the management and the preservation of the world documentary heritage. ICTH has been striving to safely preserve the valuable memories of mankind and to ensure their access to public. This webinar is part of those efforts. I hope this would be a great opportunity for documentary heritage experts to share insights and experiences for preservation and use of documentary heritage. We would be glad to hear their concerns and wisdom to effectively lay the cornerstone of the successful activities of the Center. ICTH will take the lead in enhancing professional competencies in the field of documentary heritage and provide many opportunities to serve as a link between relevant experts and the institutions. Finally, I would like to extend my special thanks to all the speakers here who are eminent experts in their field. Please stay safe and enjoy the program. Thank you.
I would like to thank the International Center for Documentary Heritage for this invitation to share my reflections on a possible framework of cooperation between UNESCO's Memory of the World Program and the International Center itself, which happens to be a Category 2 center under the auspices of UNESCO. In sharing my reflections, my perspectives, I will first of all highlight the genesis of the Memory of the World Program. I will then situate it within the broader international context and link it to various international agreements that I think are useful in trying to understand the wake of the Memory of the World Program. I will then focus on potential beneficiaries and stakeholders that could benefit from the kind of cooperation framework I'm proposing. After that, I will locate this framework within the institutional context of UNESCO. And then I'll say a few words about the International Center for Documentary Heritage itself, at least in terms of the agreement that was signed between UNESCO and the Republic of Korea. I will then spell out what I consider to be strategic objectives that could underpin, an effective cooperation framework. I will conclude by laying out a possible implementation metrics for the type of cooperation framework I am referring to. So then, in terms of the genesis of the program, it was set up in 1992, and this was in response to what was perceived then as a deterioration of documentary heritage due to various factors, not least technological obsolescence, climate change related factors, and so on and so forth. And so in setting up the program, three key objectives were set. And the first one was identifying documentary heritage of national, regional, and or global significance. The second one was preserving it. And the third was enhancing access to it. Now, in 2015, UNESCO's member states adopted what we call the 2015 recommendation concerning the preservation of and access to documentary heritage, including in digital form. What this recommendation does is to provide a normative justification and programmatic framework for the program. And it does that by laying out 5 key areas of intervention. I will mention the first 3 because these, in fact, reflect the 3 objectives of the Memory of the World program, and then I'll say a little bit more, um, uh, about the other 2. So the first 3 areas of intervention, in summary at least, identification, preservation, access. These are the keywords that one needs to remember. And like I said, they reflect the general you know um, operations of the program. And the other 2 keywords to remember are policy and cooperation. Now, I would like to think of these 5 areas in this way. Um, the first 2 are really, really the operative aspects of the program. Okay, you identify documentary heritage, and identifying documentary heritage has got its own methods, and so it is an involved process. You need to know where the documentary heritage is. You need to know whether it is a risk or not. You need to know um, what its significance might be to the community, to the country, indeed to the world. And so this is really an involved process itself. And then you have got preservation, which is as much a technical process as it is a societal process. And then you've got access, which is to enable people to enjoy um, whatever items of documentary heritage they have within their localities. The other 2, policy and cooperation, are more about enablement. They're more about the environment. So you do need to have an enabling policy environment in order for the processes of identification, preservation, and accessibility to take place. You also need a framework for national cooperation and indeed for international cooperation, national cooperation among the different memory institutions in a country. So we're talking about archives, we're talking about libraries, we're talking about museums, we're talking about other holding places. It could be universities and so on and so forth. We're talking about individual collections of heritage and so on and so forth. And you're also talking about international cooperation. You need nations to agree on a set of rules as to how to preserve documentary heritage, as to how to deal with policy issues themselves. You need a set of international principles to which countries can aspire. So this is how I tend to conceptualize the 5 key areas that are contained in the 2015 recommendation: identification, preservation, access, and then policy and cooperation. Well, having said that, then let me try to focus on the international context. Now, already, the mere fact that I have made reference to the 2015 recommendation um, should say something about the international context. So this is UNESCO's member states agreeing to this recommendation and beginning to report on national implementation of this recommendation every 4 years. So there is something of an international commitment there, an international agreement, if you will. But we don't stop there. It was also within 2015 that the 2030 agenda for sustainable development was agreed at the level of the United Nations. And as many of you know, the 2030 agenda for sustainable development is premised really on three fundamental aspects of sustainability. So you've got environmental sustainability, you've got economic sustainability, you've got social sustainability. That's the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, and within that you've got a range of 17 sustainable development goals, which are themselves linked to a range of targets and so on and so forth. Now, quite clearly, if you look at the 2015 recommendation in relation to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, you will see some similarities. And for me, in as far as documentary heritage is concerned, its identification, its preservation, its accessibility, there are some targets that I focus on, and these tend to be target 11.4, which is about protecting and safeguarding the world's cultural and natural heritage. And then you've got target 16.10, which is about public access to information and fundamental freedoms. And then you've got target 4.7, which is really about learners acquiring knowledge and skills for sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, a culture of peace, nonviolence, global citizenship, and so on and so forth. All these targets are critical to the realization of, of documentary heritage as a viable element of sustainable development. This is, for me, how the international context, up to a point at least, lends itself to what I am talking about. But within the international context, you might also want to isolate specific regional agreements, not least the African Union's implementation of what is called Agenda 2063, particularly its focus on Africa's aspiration for a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. That then is the international context. Now, very quickly, looking at who could be potential beneficiaries and stakeholders for the cooperation framework that I'll be laying out. You have memory institutions, of course. These will be libraries, these will be archives, these will be museums, these will be educational and related institutions. You've got private holders of documentary heritage in various countries in the Sahel, especially in the Maghreb, looking at Mali, um, Cote d'Ivoire, and so on and so forth. You will have individuals that have quite significant collections of ancient manuscripts, which are of historical um, importance. And of course, for me, working for UNESCO, I do need to mention that within the framework of the Memory of the World program, we have got other key stakeholders such as our own network of field officers that we work with. We've got a network of national Memory of the World committees. Where these don't exist, national commissions for UNESCO take up this role. We've got regional committees of Memory of the World in Africa, in the Asia Pacific region, in the Latin American and Caribbean region. And of course, one could go further and identify partner organizations that could include international cultural heritage associations. And there's so many of them that one can mention in the different fields that mark out documentary heritage, archival field, library field, and so on and so forth. Well, let me now turn to the institutional context. How would a cooperation framework that I'm proposing between the Memory of the World program and the International Center for Documentary Heritage benefit from the institutional context? First of all, and forgive me that this will be perhaps bureaucratic language, but bear with me because it's important. I'll isolate some words, phrases, sentences that actually make sense with respect to what I'm talking about. So we have the UNESCO medium-term strategy, which defines what the organization is going to do over a number of years, 8 years, for example. There, we've got a strategic objective that focuses on access to information and knowledge. And that is important because documentary heritage is about information, it's about knowledge, and it's about having access to it. This is what I've already said, with respect to the Memory of the World program and its objectives. And in fact, more specifically, we've got another strategic objective which focuses on protecting, promoting, and transmitting heritage. Now, that's very important because it speaks very, very clearly to what the Memory of the World program is all about. And then you've got, of course, the UNESCO program and budget, which has got expected results that it must deliver on. And one of the expected results there focuses on the identification, preservation, access to, and dissemination of documentary heritage, and the degree to which these have been strengthened globally and at the national level through the Memory of the World program. So you can see a very specific expected result dealing with documentary heritage. And then you've got, of course, UNESCO's strategy for global priority Africa, again spanning a period of 8 years. And there we've got a series of flagship projects, one of which is about developing African capacity in the preservation of documentary heritage. Okay, this particular flagship embraces a lot more than just that, but it has as one of its main actions developing African capacity in the preservation of documentary heritage. It's important to understand this, but also one may look at the UNESCO SEEDS action plan. SEEDS is Small Island Developing States. This particular plan, among many other areas of action, also focuses on cooperating with public and professional institutions in small island developing states to identify and preserve documentary heritage at risk and ensure its accessibility. With that, the institutional context of UNESCO. But what about the International Center for Documentary Heritage? Well, it has four key objectives that resonate with UNESCO's institutional context as I have described it. And this is not by accident. The International Center for Documentary Heritage was born out of UNESCO. So the first objective is to support the Memory of the World program, including by collecting and monitoring information on preservation status, accessibility, and use of inscribed documentary heritage, and indeed including participating in policymaking for the preservation of records and their content, especially in disaster situations. The second objective is research, really. Researching the management and care of documentary heritage and developing new creative content, including publishing regular reports and organizing international symposia to share results, creating opportunities for countries to share management strategies for documentary heritage in analog and digital formats, and so on and so forth. Thirdly, ICDH aims to provide education and training support for countries with a modicum of knowledge of the preservation, care, and use of documentary heritage, including by inviting experts and specialists in records management to offer education and training programs for a range of needs, as well as by developing new training and capacity building programs in concert with national actors within the Republic of Korea, not least the National Archives of Korea, and such other existing training programs as may be identified for this purpose. And lastly, ICDH seeks to engage in public relations activities to raise awareness around the world about the importance of documentary heritage, including by supporting UNESCO's Memory of the World program to publicize its range of benefits on social media, websites, and other forms of online communication. Now, these are the objectives of the ICDH. Its activities are derived from those objectives, and there is ongoing discussion between ICDH and the Memory of the World program as to how these objectives may better be realized within the framework of UNESCO. So, having said that, then, what would be the key strategic objectives for effective cooperation between the Memory of the World program and the International Center for Documentary Heritage? I would like to suggest 5 strategic objectives. First of all, it's to identify memory institutions with documentary heritage at risk of degradation or destruction. That is important, and I'll be developing that point later. Number 2, arrange for digitization of such documentary heritage. This is important for the safeguarding of documentary heritage as a whole. 3, advocate for effective national preservation policies where these do not exist. 4, promoting access to such heritage through a mix of media, including social media, of course. And five, increase the representation of documentary heritage on the Memory of the World International Register from underrepresented countries, especially those in Africa and small island developing states. Now, I do have a table there that shows um, the numbers of inscriptions and their corresponding percentages. I will use percentages in order to drive the point home. So we've got the Memory of the World International Register, which receives nominations from individuals and organizations um, for items of documentary heritage that they wish to see inscribed on the register. What the register does is to draw attention to these items of documentary heritage, and by so doing, um, um, raise awareness about their significance and the need for their continued preservation, and also, of course, uh, promoting access to those items of documentary heritage. So very, very quickly, by region, Africa has only 24 inscriptions, which is 5%. The Arab states, 13, about 2%. Asia and the Pacific, 116, about 22%. Europe and North America, 274, about 52%. Latin America and the Caribbean, 93, about 18%. And others, these tend to be international organizations that are transnational. They've got 7, about 1%. Evidently, focus needs to be on Africa, to be on the Arab states, and yes, also on Latin America and the Caribbean. And if you looking at Africa, this is where you find most of the least um, developed countries, um, also small island developing states that are poorer than others, tend to be um, in poorer regions overall. Africa itself, um, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and so on and so forth. So that, I think, makes the case as to why there is need to increase the representation of items of documentary heritage from underrepresented uh, countries, regions of the world. Well, let me now focus on what could be a possible implementation metrics for this cooperation that I'm positing. And I'll do so by highlighting the strategic objectives that I have already alluded to and linking them to specific strategic interventions that could potentially help. And it is these strategic interventions, I think, that could, in a sense, define this cooperation between the Memory of the World Program and the International Center for Documentary Heritage. So let's take the first strategic objective, identifying documentary heritage at risk. Obviously, given the objectives of the ICDH. I believe that it needs to marshal its resources to undertake research, any type of research. It could be desk research, using other information sources in order to understand documentary heritage that could be at risk. And UNESCO could support this research project using its network of national memory board committees, regional memory board committees, and yes, indeed, its network of field offices. Now we already have uh, um, examples, patchy examples, in different organizations concerning this particular issue. For example, you've got the International Council on Archives with its guiding principles for safe havens for archives at risk. You've got IFLA, which is about library um, organizations and institutions. They've got their IFLA risk register for documentary cultural heritage. Um, and yes, you could have targeted research to establish memory institutions in need, especially in Africa, in small island developing states, and so on and so forth. And the carrot could be to link the identification process for such documentary heritage to the possibility of eventual inscription of any items as may be identified on the Memory of the World International Register. This is important because it is what will encourage memory institutions to cooperate with the International Center for Documentary Heritage. And the Memory of the World program itself could provide the technical support that is needed by such memory institutions to gather information that may be useful for preparing a nomination file. So those are some of the strategic interventions that one could envision with respect to the first strategic objective, namely identifying documentary heritage at risk. Let me now focus on the second strategic objective, which is digitization of documentary heritage. Now we don't just identify documentary heritage at risk. We need to do something about it, and that's where this particular strategic objective comes in, especially for poorer countries and the memory institutions within them. So the first point that one could think of by way of strategic intervention is to provide capacity building for digitization in memory institutions. That is key. But also, more importantly, one could envision providing support for the actual digitization of documentary heritage. And here at UNESCO, for example, we have the benefit of UNESCO's Archives Digitization Lab, which was used as part of a project called Digitizing Our Shared UNESCO History. And that experience can be brought to bear on such capacity building and digitization efforts. Furthermore, strategically, one could envision supporting the participation of such memory institutions in networking activities in digitization, including through staff exchanges. And I believe that the International Center for Documentary Heritage has got organic linkages with Korean memory institutions, with sufficient capacities and resources to impart knowledge and skills to their poorer counterparts, especially in Africa and small island developing states. And I think that these staff exchanges can be facilitated by the International Center for Documentary Heritage. It is important that they do this beyond their borders in order to be seen as truly international. And this is part of the dialogue that we're carrying on with the center. But also, I would like to suggest that one of the strategic intervention might be to support, promote, and draw attention to studies and publications on digitization among memory institutions in need of digitization assistance. Now, luckily, the Memory of the World program is about to publish a manual on managing low-cost digitization projects in least developed countries and small island developing states. This is important because we realized, especially with COVID-19, that the digitization would facilitate the manipulation of documentary heritage in the digital environment, thereby increasing access to it. And we think that this manual will go some way towards raising awareness of this need and encourage memory institutions to embrace the idea of digital preservation as key to safeguarding documentary heritage and ensuring its accessibility. Well then, let me move on to the third strategic objective, policy advocacy. Now again, if you recall, the 5 key areas of action that the 2015 recommendation lays out include policy. And this is important. And so one strategic intervention would be to continue what we have been doing, which is hosting regional consultations based on the 2015 recommendation, encouraging member states to domesticate the provisions of the 2015 recommendation, to incorporate them into their policy and legislative frameworks. This is very important because it will increase the number of member states that can report on national implementation of the 2015 recommendation. So this is one strategic intervention that we will continue to do, and hopefully the International Center for Documentary Heritage can be on board, particularly in the Asia Pacific region where it is located, to actually champion this along with our field officers there. Secondly, I would like to suggest that another area for strategic intervention would be organizing targeted technical workshops focused on effective preservation policy formulation, implementation, and monitoring. Now, we haven't done this as far as I can recall, and yet it is important because policy advocacy shouldn't take place in a vacuum. Policy advocacy needs to take into account the specificities of each country. Now, we have countries that are in conflict. We have post-conflict countries. These require specialized attention, specialized focus in as far as policy formulation is concerned. And that is why it is important to have such targeted technical workshops. Well, thirdly, might I suggest involving memory institutions with significant documentary heritage at risk in UNESCO's ongoing activities. We have, for example, the Global Policy Forum series, which um, which is held annually or biannually, as the case might be. It might be important to involve such memory institutions in the global policy forum in that sense, because it does raise issues about how um, member states can look at the different international agreements and domesticate them within their own policy frameworks. For example, the second edition of the Global Policy Forum focused on disaster risk reduction, as a strategy for sustainable preservation of documentary heritage. And that is important. It is a key principles that one could adopt from the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction for national policy making. And more importantly, a forum such as this one provides a platform for healthy exchanges among memory institutions from the different parts of of, of, of the world. Well, another strategic intervention for me, in as far as policy advocacy is concerned, is to strengthen our regional committees of memory of the world. And I'm thinking here in particular of the Africa Regional Committee for Memory of the World. This is an important regional committee which has been weaker than the other two being um, the regional committee for the Asia Pacific region, MOCAP, and um, the regional committee for Latin America and the Caribbean, MOLAC. And this work can be done internally within UNESCO, and there are efforts being made towards that. But it can also be done externally by partners such as the International Center for Documentary Heritage, particularly by inviting members of such regional committees to take part in any activities that the center may be contemplating, whether those involve the Memory of the World program directly or indirectly. So it is important to do this as much as possible. Well, let me move on then to the fourth strategic objective, which is about promoting online access. Well, the first thing obviously here is to identify strategic partners that could host an online platform for digitized documentary heritage. Clearly, the ICDH is a clear choice here, and one would have to decide, what aspects of documentary heritage they could be responsible for. Um, is it the inscriptions on the Memory of the World International Register, or do they go beyond that and encourage memory institutions to identify items of documentary heritage that they would like showcased on the online platform for potential use and reuse by ordinary people, by researchers, policymakers themselves, and so on and so forth. That's an important conversation to have. Now, we have, for example, already um, um, sort of entered into some agreement with the with the Google Arts and Culture um, platform for them to showcase some of the items on the international register, and they do so by going beyond just showing the images, but also constructing narratives to say what those images about, so that they're more digestible, more attractive to the wider public. So that's, I think, one way of showing the richness of the documentary heritage um, that is showcased by those select items of documentary heritage which are on the register. But also, you know, we are trying to, like I said, to go beyond the inscriptions on the register. And I think having an online platform such as I am proposing could encourage reluctant memory institutions to be more forthcoming, and particularly if there is the promise of digitization, there is the promise of accessibility. But that accessibility has to be negotiated. It's not blanket accessibility. It has to be negotiated with the custodians, with the owners, because some of them may not want um, their collections to be wholly open to the world. They might want to monetize them. That is the discussion to be had, although the 2015 recommendation encourages universal access. It also recognizes the particularities that define ownership of documentary heritage, and that is important. But a key issue with respect to this online platform is that it will help to publicize uh, the digitized documentary heritage in order to attract traffic to it, including through exploiting the social media platforms of Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, especially to target young audiences. And like I said, we are already in a relationship with Google Arts and Culture with respect to their online platform, where we've got narratives of the items, at least selected items of documentary heritage featuring on our international register. Well, with respect to my final point, which is increasing representation on the Memory of the World International Register for underrepresented countries or regions. I think that it is important, with the involvement of the International Center for Documentary Heritage, to engage in capacity building which would enable memory institution to identify items for possible inscription. Like I said, identifying documentary heritage is an involved process. It's a multidisciplinary process, and it requires a certain rigor in order to determine whether a particular item of documentary heritage is of world significance, defined in terms of its historical value, as well as in terms of its intrinsic and extrinsic characteristics. It is important to understand this as an involved process. And beyond building capacity for identifying items for possible inscription, it's important to add a little more value. How do we add value to memory institutions? And I think that the possibility of digitization is a form of value addition. Digitization for better safeguarding of documentary heritage that needs to be built into this package of capacity building for memory institutions that would desire at some point at least to identify items for possible inscription on the Memory of the World International Register. And yes, another aspect of value addition would be enhanced accessibility, including through the online platform that I have already described. Well, this then represents an implementation matrix that I consider would make the proposed cooperation between UNESCO's Memory of the World Program and the International Center for Documentary Heritage viable. And I believe that with continued discussion, conversation about the ideas that I have put on the table, we can ensure that our cooperation delivers on the objectives of the Memory of the World Program and those of the International Center for Documentary Heritage, which are summed up in the 5 areas of intervention of the 2015 recommendation concerning the preservation of and access to documentary heritage, including in digital form: identification, preservation, access, policy, in cooperation. On that note, I'd like to thank you for listening to me.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kyung-ho Seo. I am a professor emeritus of Seoul National University, where I had taught courses in Chinese literature for 30 years. And I also had enjoyed the membership of International Advisory Committee, which is the main operational body of the Memory of the World Program of UNESCO for 8 years, from 2005 through 2013, in which period I have read many nomination dossiers of the country member states throughout the world. I'm happy to be invited by ICDH, International Center for Documentary Heritage in Cheongju City, Republic of Korea, that was established last year, to speak about the potential and projected activities of the center to implement the goal and spirit of the Memory of the World Program, as well as a broader goal of preserving and ensuring access to documentary heritages scattered in many countries that should be our common and shared property of humankind. This center was established with an agreement, signed agreement between UNESCO and the government of Republic of Korea to help the development of a Memory of the World program, as well as to enhance public acknowledgement on the value of documentary heritage. This is one of the UNESCO's Category 2 center that is operated by the hosting government with financial and administrative support. And this center is now a very young institution. As a young institution, is now preparing some activities that are related to the Memory of the World program, as well as a broader activities of preserving the documents. So I would like to speak on the three potential and possible projected fields of activities of the center in the years to come. The Memory of the World program was launched by UNESCO in 1992, and from 1997, it started to accept the nominations from member states for inscription to international register of the program. And so far, more than 300 documentary heritage has been inscribed to international register, as well as there are a large number of the documents also inscribed to regional committees or national committees of the program. Memory of the World program is, however, a little bit different, even though it belongs to the heritage projects initiated by UNESCO from other heritage programs like World Heritage Program or Intangible Cultural Heritage Programs. Those two programs are operated under the Intergovernmental Convention, and the programs have sufficient financial resource as well as administrative manpower to operate. But Memory of the World program is different in the sense that it is operated in collaboration with the Secretariat of the program and a small committee called International Advisory Committee, composed by 14 experts from different continents. Since this committee is operated by volunteers only, civilian volunteers particularly, the program does not have any financial resources or other resources to extend its activities other than the evaluation for inscription of the nominated documents. This is one of the problems that had been pointed out in the recent sessions of the International Advisory Committee, but we see in the near future any hope that the situation would be improved. ICDH is, however, willing to provide help to extend the activities of the program into much larger, many other fields. So the first thing I think I need to point out is locating the memory institutions that are scattered around in many, many countries throughout the world, so that the program can be operated through very cohesive and cooperative network of information exchange, as well as assistant helps from the experts for assessing values of the documents that are under the custody of many memory institutions. By saying this, I'm thinking of a platform or a network in which as many possible numbers of memory institutions are arranged and provided mutually their information pertaining to documents they are holding. I think this is the first step we should take. Then, if we have a greater map of memory institutions that either share similar activities or are holding the documents that are possible candidates for nomination to the Memory of the World program, then I think it would be very easier to locate what documents should be picked up and studied and eventually to be nominated. This is one of the fields that facilitate the activities of the Memory of the World program. This is said particularly because I have seen in many countries that people are not quite familiar with the existence of the program. Even though they know, some of them, they know about the program, they do not have any resource to prepare the nomination, or they lack the information, appropriate information as to how to prepare the nomination. If we have such a platform or network, we can easily exchange the necessary information and also provide some help from international experts who are able to assess the value of the particular documents each memory institution is holding. Second point I would like to say is the need for monitoring the already inscribed documentary heritage. The Memory of the World program has a goal of preserving the documents in danger and enhance public access to those documents. In other words, the holding the document is also very important, but it is also important to publicize or to enhance the public acknowledgement, encouraging general public to make access to the documents and understand the nature of the memories embodied by those documents. It is a way of understanding the past histories correctly, as well as reckoned by some documents that had been either neglected or ignored in their own country. For this purpose, the Memory of World program had been trying to find some resources for monitoring the already the inscribed documents about the state of the management, as well as the existence or challenge of the dangers, possible dangers in each memory institutions. But as has been said before, the program does not have any resource to do that by itself. And now with the launching of the International Center for Documentary Heritage, which is willing to provide some help to the program that the program itself cannot activate, I think the monitoring is a very important and potential field of activity of the center. It is not an easy job because for monitoring, some experts should be physically to be on the memory institution that is holding the documents at stake. He or she must see the documents, how it is managed, how much people are making access to the documents. It is a field that cannot be done online. And for this purpose, the ICDH is willing to invite some international expert to make a visit to some selected memory institutions, check the state of the preservation, and also observe how much portion of the general public are exposed and are aware of the existence and the value of that particular documents. I think this activity should be done with the approval of the International Advisory Committee first, in collaboration with the program secretariat in the UNESCO and the International Center for Documentary Heritage. The center will propose the International Advisory Committee to draft a guideline for monitoring and detailed methodology. And then if that is set, then International Advisory Committee will select the memory institutions to be monitored first. And after that, the ICDH, the International Center for, after that, the ICDH will provide financial support, enabling the invited expert to pay a physical visit to the memory institutions that were pre-selected by International Advisory Committee. That's the general procedure of the monitoring activities on the inscribed documentary heritage. And I think the discussion is going on, and I anticipate that it will be launched sometime late this year. No, this year it's already late, but maybe in the first half of the next year. The third point I'd like to speak is helping the poorly resourced memory institutions to first excavate, to discover the values of their own documents. It's kind of peculiar cases to those poor countries, poorly resourced memory institutions that cannot receive sufficient budget from government, or that lacks the trained experts to deal with the document, the management of the documents. I think I need to speak about a little bit about the experiences we had in the workshop for Memory of the World that had been hosted by the Korean National Commission for UNESCO in the past decade. During the past decade, the Commission had organized workshops by inviting, on the one hand, a small number of international experts, and on the other hand, inviting nominators from poorly resourced countries so that they can meet together and they check the documents brought forth together, assess the value, and the experts encourages and assist to write a nomination dossier and also refine with the purpose of eventually submitting to the program. It was a little bit surprised to find that many experts from those memory institutions were not very much familiar with the program. They were not very sure about what type of or what kind of documentary heritage can become a candidate for inscription. And they are not well aware of the procedure of nominating, submitting a nomination to the program, as well as how they assess how a document value of the documents can be assessed in terms of the criteria imposed by the program. So in that workshop, we found that the activities should be from very starting point. We had to explain what is the program, what is the procedure, and how the nomination dossier should be stated, and how the criteria should be stated to satisfy. And especially it was a problem for many experts of the memory institutions that they had been confined to national perspectives only. But the Memory of the World program requires the nominators to state its world significance in terms of international context and historical context. This is a challenge to many experts from local memory institutions. Therefore, I propose the ICDH to provide practical help to locate the documents that can be candidate for a nomination, locate the documents potential for nomination, and provide some assistance, practical assistance in developing its nomination and eventually submit them to the program. This had been done by Korean National Commission for UNESCO so far. And since this commission has many other projects going on, it may be desirable if ICDH can take over the project and enlarge it. Well, of course, it is an annual workshop, but sometimes done only on regional basis. By combining this project with the project of organizing a network of memory institutions throughout the world, then information can flow much faster, much easier, and also more practical assistance can be given. This is the point. The help, the assistance for locating the documentary heritage and also locating developing a nomination dossier is one of the important field of activities potential for International Center for Documentary Heritage. And finally, but not the least, I'd like to suggest develop a new perspective on the horizons that is made by documentary heritage is inscribed to international register so far. As the number of inscriptions increased, there emerged a certain cluster, a cluster of documents that share thematic commonality. Sometimes it is quite easily identifiable to some clusters are identifiable, I'm sorry. And let me give you an example. For example, there is a slavery system in 18th and 19th century. We have scores of the documents pertaining to the slaves, enslaved people from Caribbean countries as well as South American countries. So far, most of the historical knowledge on slavery system that were brought forth to the platform of the Memory of the World program had been confined to those regions, the Caribbean and South American regions. Recently, however, Mauritius, an island country in the Indian Ocean, had brought forth to the workshop on the Memory of the World program, as I said before, a new archive on slave trading system in Mauritius. It is quite particular and very important document because this archive deals with the slaves from Western Africa and Eastern Africa, as well as from Southeast Asia, India, and even China, as far as China, which means that this small island in Indian Ocean was a hub for trading the enslaved people, where the enslaved people had come from many countries and also went to many countries. Well, a substantial portion of the enslaved had worked in that island, while others were traded back to other parts of the world, possibly to Caribbeans or South America too. So this document was not yet inscribed, but our colleague from Mauritius told us, assured us that they will refine the nomination and then will submit to the next nomination cycle of the Memorial Award Program. If this is put together, then we are closer to complete history, global history of the slave system that had been operating from 16th through 19th century. Filling the gaps or filling the lack of information in certain part of the world. This is what I call the cluster. We have another clusters too about human rights issue from Latin America and Korea from Philippines that recorded the terrorizing politics in some countries by dictators themselves of a military background or had been a strong support from military sector in each country. And it was kind of a trend from during the post-war, post-colonial era that many political leaders thought that to ensure a strong government, the terrorizing or brutal atrocity can be rationalized to achieve the goal of nation building. I think it was a phenomena that had been pervading the third quarter of the 20th century and still is persisting in some countries too. And if we put together, then uprising or terrorizing in certain country was not an isolated event. Whereas in Dominican Republic, the uprising had erupted. On the other part of the world, about 30 years in Korean Peninsula, the uprising had erupted against the military dictatorship. So it, as a cluster, it expresses the common human aspiration to protect human dignity and is willing to resist against the power that attempts to violate the very basic human right. If we put some documents into such an identifiable clusters, then we can rearrange the inscribed documents in a new way to encourage historians to have a new perspective on the historical memory, as well as to develop new methods of research or new perspective for general public. This is, I think, one of the important field that ICDH can contribute to. So, in sum, the Memorial Award Program pursues to protect the documentary heritage in danger, and also to enhance the public access to the value of the documentary heritage. But ICDH's activity may extend beyond it. It can encourage historians to approach the documentary heritage with a new and fresh perspective for the possibility of rewriting the global history, and also fill in the gap that had been lacking, that had been left void in the existing global history. I think I have spoken everything I could think, and I hope my talk was helpful in understanding the potential field of activity of ICDH, as well as general information about the Memory of the World program and the value of documentary heritage as common property of all the humankind. Thank you.